everyone. Welcome to the ConTech Exec. Today, we're here talking about UI UX, which is another weird acronym for user interface and user experience. Now, most of the time, I like to talk about construction experience with technology. But in this episode, I'm kind of turning it around. I'm talking with a technologist about construction. Now, I was lucky enough to steal a few minutes with one of Austin Lane's senior engineers, Lee Robertson. Now, Lee has been with Austin Lane for over 5 years now and leads the charge on the user friendliness of AO Mobile. And as it turns out, the design of the product is not so much about the rules of the design here at Austin Lane. It's really about the user. So let's check it out. Lee, thank you for joining me here this morning. Just wanted to talk to you about kind of UI UX stuff because this podcast is really mostly about making mobile applications for construction people user friendly. And I thought I would stick with the experts here at Austin Lane. And so since you're a senior software engineer, I thought that'd be a good place to start, right? So tell me a little bit. You got into UI UX, like you got out of college. Like, how did you get here, like to start, designing stuff for Austin Lane?
Well, it's kind of interesting because when I was in college, the classes I went through were more so based on here's how to program. And so when people think UI UX, yeah, there's like programming that goes into making a UI or UX, but UI UX is like its own field in general. So there's programming I view, and then there's like designing UI UX. So when you think of it, it comes down to how do you design the page and then how does that page flow? And so, there's a lot to that. There's actual sciences behind what colors do you use, where should things be placed, people that are right-handed versus being left-handed. So, I actually didn't start gaining experience with any of this stuff till I actually got my first job. It's stuff that you don't think about because as programmers, we just think, I just need a button that saves something. So, but from a user standpoint, they want it to look a certain way. It's the kind of verbiage you use. There's just a lot to it.
Any unique challenges that you've seen kind of, and I
Oh
know
yeah.
you've probably seen a lot, but construction wise, any unique challenges to like the UI UX design to kind of what it takes?
Well, one of the things that we kind of discuss here is that there's a broad spectrum, when it comes to our user base. We have guys that have been doing construction since like the internet was invented to guys that are now coming out of college and a lot younger, a little more familiar with it. So, that's just a challenge right there in itself. We have guys who perhaps just hate technology, don't want to have to use it, but it's part of their career versus, like I was saying, guys like that have grown up with it and pretty familiar with it. We're given an iPhone at the age of 6. So, so that's just a challenge right there is just how do we make a user interface, how do we make the whole experience something that's friendly, but also not boring for those, it meets the needs of both. We have something that's kind of fun to use every day, but also it's not sophisticated to our user base, especially for those that are somewhat still just trying to figure out how to use that technology in general.
Did you kind of use somewhat of like the iPhone kind of thought? I know the menu at the bottom and those kind of things. I mean, are there standards in the industry that say, hey, it kind of just needs to be this way?
Well, yeah, I mean, because you think about it, the menu is probably one of the things that you'll touch the most. And so, it's something you want to be right there. You quickly want to jump around between pieces in the application. And so, a set standard, I mean, you kind of see it a lot. I mean, you think about the computer you're using right now, there's a dock right there at the bottom. You think about your iPhone, you think about any application you use in general, most places you'll find that menu there at the bottom. So, I don't know if there's like an actual piece of documentation somewhere that says if you want to have a menu, here's the best place to put it, but you'll find it's pretty common practice.
Right, right. So, do you ever get a chance and to kind of interface, or talk to people kind of out in the field, or is most of this information kind of delivered to you as to design and that kind of stuff? Is Do you ever get a chance to just talk to the folks out in the field, like some customer feedback?
Uh, when it comes to customer feedback, I mean, we have our users conferences, and for those that aren't aware, our user conferences are pretty much something that we put on that allow us to interface directly face to face with our clients. And so one of the sessions that I actually do in that conference is a mobile web client session. And so I've heard feedback. So when I actually first started working here about 5 years ago, the user conference is one of the very first things that I attended where I actually got to hear feedback from customers. And so I would say, yeah, I have got to interface with customers to hear feedback on perhaps either new features they want implemented, um, how can things be enhanced, a little here and there tweaks. But it also comes back also just from our user base here at the office. So as well as getting client feedback, we also have internal feedback from, us here. So I get a pretty mixed bag of input on terms of how should things look and feel.
Right. Anything that you remember specifically that stood out, like especially when you were working on, let's say, version 12 that you used from the user conference, you're like, yeah, we got to put this in. Anything you remember specifically?
Well, I kind of going back to that very first user conference, it's something now that we introduced from version 12 of the mobile web client was just being able to have more control over your grid, so being able to reorder it. And so when we were going into the design process for version 12, we wanted to try and still kind of have that same look and feel of version 11 in the sense of how does the product work, but how can we also squeeze in new features? So once again, going back to what we were talking about before with our older client base, it's not something that's brand new and throws people off, but at the same time, we're still bringing new things to the table. So like going back to that, so in version 12, we added the ability so you can reorder grid columns. I remember that actually being something that someone brought up in the UC19 users conference we had.
Mhm. Good calls. Yeah, I think that's a great feature on that because I would, like I said, if I were, I'm an old field guy from back in the day. If I were to have that, I probably would have used it a lot. Only had the stuff that I was working on like right there at the very beginning. Um, so there's a lot of talk. I don't know if it's a hype cycle or not. Now I'm still I write about this and I talk about this and I study this stuff about what the trends in the industry are and where things are going. Everybody's talking about AI. Everybody's talking about augmented reality. And there's a lot of features out there. Is there anything that maybe I mean, you might be too far into, just, version 13 design to that to be looking, but do you see any, trends or technologies that, maybe they're coming up that we don't know about?
Well, I think the biggest thing, of course, with AI is that there's like this whole spill with quantum computers coming out and just all that whole realm. But it's actually watching a video last night on that. It's just, as time goes on, and I think it's one of the things that we've discussed here internally is that clients, the amount of jobs that they're working on continues to grow, and that means the amount of data that comes with that will grow as well. So, that's kind of where the need of like, I'd say it's way, 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 way down the line, but there's quantum computing and they're starting to make, what's the word? They're starting to get over hurdles with that, but it's still a long ways away. And so what that comes with, like you're talking about AI being able to quickly automate processes, I think is kind of where I think just a lot of things in general are going is just trying to not necessarily eliminate fill or jobs from people, but mainly just eliminate those minute, uh, tedious tasks that people have to do every day.
Right.
And I think especially with our product, I would say someone who's out in the field who just worked 10 hours, however many hours a day, probably the last thing they're thinking about is having to come back in and enter what they did for the day.
Mhm.
And so I think especially with our product, not necessarily AI perhaps, but just the whole idea of how can we automate and all these processes for our users. It's kind of what drives the product in general is not necessarily, oh, what do we think? It's mainly what do our users think? What do our clients think would be the best thing? And that's kind of what I think differentiates a lot of the way that we think or do. It's not like we have a board and it's what the board wants. It's literally what do our clients want? What is the feedback that we're getting that we can do to improve the product? Because I mean, you think about it, a lot of the stuff that we implement, it's not just based off what one client, it's what a lot of clients are saying. And so when we add that one feature, we're not just helping one client, we're helping many clients. And so, and I think, the more that as the product grows, the more information that we continue to have, the more we can automate things because it gives us an idea of what's going on out there in the field. I mean, because I'm not out there in the field every day. So a lot of what we try to determine, is what's the fit, what's the data that we're seeing, where are the trends going with that data. And so the more data that we have, the more we can, perhaps start to automate things, whether that be through the use of AI. It's mainly just, I view AI as a tool as something to help with efficiency, not necessarily to take away, but mainly just, I mean, I use it here and there just to help me program in the sense of instead of me having to Google and go through articles or whatever, or help fields or help forms to figure out how to solve a problem, I can just ask it, how can I make this look better? I don't know, some general use case like that, and it'll give me examples of ways things could be improved.
So there is a question today about, AI, and obviously AI can go through data much faster than, we can go through it, right? It just has that ability. Now, I don't know which AI formats you guys use. Like, I like Perplexity of late. I've been kind of looking at that and messing around with that. Of course, Chat GPT is always good too. But when it comes to big data and AI, and then all the energy questions, will we have enough, to power all this stuff? I mean, are we gonna thinking about overcoming those hurdles? I know this doesn't have a lot to do with UI UX, but there's a lot there, because a lot of times you're working in your system and then you're sitting there kind of waiting on it, right? And
Yeah.
a little bit. So what's kind of being done, or what do you see in the industry is being done to always try to make that, everybody wants it faster, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about the way that AI works or how these language models works, is just like, I mean, what's 4 + 3? 7. It's like I can spit that off really fast. But then if I asked you what's 237 plus 463, you
Yeah.
know, all of a sudden there's a process now that it's a slower response. And that's kind of how it is with AI in the sense of, there's right off the back, but the more complex things get, so the larger these data sets get, the more complex problems become when it comes to solving them. And so, that's where I was kind of coming back around with the quantum computing. I mean, there's like computers out there that have like billions of processors in them now. Like,
Hmm.
I think Google just came out with one. I can't remember. I think there's another company that has another just massive supercomputers, is what they're calling them. And so, that's kind of going back around with just solving these problems and also trying to keep it efficient at the same time. We're still at a time where all of this stuff is new and not totally figured out. And I think we're still ways, ways away from that being something that, it's like a total, okay, we check it off the list, it's been solved. So, that's also a challenge that we face here at the company is, we get clients that are just, the idea is for companies to grow. And so, even the smaller clients we have, they're going to continue to grow. They're going to have more jobs. And so, how do we scale, but at the same time, how do we scale and just keep things going? And how do we not let these become just big hurdles to us? And so, that's just the challenge of just software in general is just it's an evolving thing that is never the same, but it also keeps it interesting.
Right. So are there anythings out there as UI UX wise, anything new that maybe we don't see that we might see in the future, that's going to make things simpler? Like, are we going to just be able to, you know, talk to AL Mobile and have it do its thing? Or are we going to be able to, is it going to make it simpler experience? Is there anything out there that we're thinking about?
I mean, like kind of back to your previous question is the goal is to automate it. So perhaps, one of the things that we're trying to do is, they're part of the construction process. There's like a design phase all the way down to the implementation of it. And a lot of our clients want all of that just right there, it's the less amount of taps. So that's where the UX comes into plays. How can we show all this information on the screen, but at the same time, not make it look just so super confusing, right?
All
It's
right.
like, because a lot of people want, I want to see this and I want to see this and I also want to be able to create time, but also edit this, but then there's this. And it's like, well, you're working on an iPhone, your iPhone's only like this big. So it's like, how do I fit all that on there at the same time? But so yeah, so in the sense of as things continue to grow, that's something we're working on. It's one of the things that Austin talks about is just how do we reduce the amount of taps on the screen? And so, and that's something we're always working on. It's always something, oh, hey, we could add a little field right here, and all of a sudden, boom, you now see how many hours were spent on a job or how many employees were used on a job, that kind of thing. So, in the sense of where the product's going, it's just reducing tabs. And so with that, you'll see the UI change with more information right there at your fingertips, making the product more efficient, more productive, and so on.
So I think you brought up a good point about having so much stuff. You got all these different people. I want to see this on the screen, or I need to see that on a screen, and I want to do it in, a tap, right? And do all that kind of stuff. You talked kind of about, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but you talk about, you get feedback and you have to evaluate, because you're not just designing for one person out in the field, right? You're
Yeah.
designing for thousands of users, across the spectrum. And so every one of those has to be taken into consideration, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you could design a lot of things, but there's stuff that you have to stay away from, right? There's definitely parts of this, well, we could do that, but then this affects this, right? It's you
Yeah.
run into that a lot, right?
And it's a domino effect with a lot of things. And so, that's why we kind of have two aspects of the product. We have the mobile web client and we have the full client. And so you think about the mobile web client, I mean, anyone that uses AL Mobile could use the mobile web client. It isn't necessarily just for the guys out in the field. Back office people can use it too. But then with that, back office people want to see different things than guys out in the field want to see, right? And so, we try to cater to both as much as we can, as well as keeping the product simple as well as efficient. And those are kind of, they sometimes can butt heads with each other because, oh, simpler screen may mean less, may mean more, it doesn't, it just depends on who we're trying to cater to. And so, that's where the challenge is because you'll have certain people that want to use a particular feature in the product, but then that may mean you have to use the web client versus using the full client. So,
Yeah, and
yeah,
I don't, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but we get, version 13 is coming out, and you know, your take on it is, I think, as I see the software improve, and I see what you guys are doing, I think the desktop is becoming much more user friendly, right?
yeah.
Is that, I mean, obviously, is that the focus of version 13? What do you think?
I'd say, yeah, it's making it more friendly. Same idea once again of how can we reduce tabs? How can we show more information on the screen without the same time confusing the user? But then also there's a lot of new behind the scenes stuff that we're doing that users won't even know about that's also just improving the overall experience for the user as well. So when it comes to version 13, it's once again, it's a battle of how can we keep the product familiar, how can we keep it familiar to our existing clients, but at the same time, when they open up the product, the application, oh man, this feels a little new. It's kind of like when you walk into somebody's house, maybe it's looked a certain way for the longest time. But, when I go back to my mom and dad's house, it may look a little bit different, but I know where everything's at still, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
right. They did a
so it's,
remodel, but the silverware is still in the same drawer.
yeah, exactly. So, so I mean and that's the challenge, right? Because a lot of people always want. I mean, you think about it, the iPhone's always like the amount of feedback that you get on your iPhone. I wish it did this. I wish it did that. You know, Apple will slowly. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're trying to slowly just implement new features, but at the same time, not all of a sudden, oh, here's a whole new screen, and you have no idea what you're looking at anymore. And then, then the domino effect of that is that it requires more training. We have to almost reintroduce the product to everybody. And obviously clients don't necessarily want that. And I mean, neither do we. So, there's always that battle between bringing in new stuff and at the same time, how do we keep some of the old stuff?
I just wanted to speak with you today to talk about, kind of like that UX, UI, UX
Yeah.
kind of thing. Because, and one of the things I wanted to say is like, a lot of times I think there's a big discrepancy between what construction people are thinking, their terminology versus what technology people are thinking, right?
Yeah.
Somebody would say, we've got a bad, we've got a UX, UI, UX has a feature, and then, but a construction guy would say it's a piece of shit. It's like, it's, I don't know. It's like the terminology sometimes, that's what I was trying to figure out, like that feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
Of what do you get, direct feedback from the construction people, and would it make a difference anyway, because you kind of speak in kind of two different languages, almost.
I mean, we say it all the time. I mean, you'll hear it at the users conference, you hear it anywhere pretty much more. I would say when we're out on the job site, just training, the conferences we have through support is just, we want the feedback. That's the whole reason we do all this stuff. I'd say that's what makes AL Mobile stand out is everything that goes into the product has been based on some sort of feedback. It's not based on just Austin had some idea that he just wants to throw in there, or someone in Timbuktu said, "Oh, hey, this would be cool." It's literally, does this provide value to our users, and can everybody use it? And so that's where that feedback is so critical. So for anyone that hears this and wonders, does my input matter or does my feedback matter? The answer is yeah, yes, it does. It's very crucial that we get feedback because that's what drives our roadmap. That's what drives the direction of the product is feedback, honestly, because I mean, like I said, my experience, I didn't come from the construction background. Anything that I know construction has come based just on my time here at the company, learning what goes on through our clients, and all that's from feedback.
Right.
So if clients, users, whoever has some sort of feedback that on perhaps how something could be tweaked, like give it to us. Like it's not like literally I go to somebody and tell them, hey, this is a cool thing you did, perhaps we do this, and it goes off into the realm somewhere. It literally is considered feedback that is something that you may notice in the next release. Oh wow,
Right.
this thing I just said is right here. Like you're talking to the people that are making the product, right? It's not like there's some layer of abstraction with us and our clients. For the most part, when we have those users conferences, you're talking to the people that are working on it hands on. So whatever feedback you have is there in the back of my mind. Like I remember that stuff, and it goes into
Right.
the lot of how we operate as a team is what have clients said. So when we're stuck, like we hit a little roadblock, it's like, should we add this? Should we not add this? It's like, well, what have clients said?
Right.
So
And I do know that we do evaluate, like we have long lists of things. We keep those lists of suggestions. And I know, Austin always puts them up all the time over the years, the different surveys that he's put up,
yeah,
and has done that. And those lists are those are abbreviated lists, really, because there's still stuff that, maybe doesn't even make the list that still gets evaluated. Everything that comes in gets evaluated, for this. All right, man. Well, listen, I appreciate your time, this morning.
yeah,
I know, you got
this
stuff
is
to
fun.
work on. Yeah. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, UI UX, and how we want to make things user friendly, and kind of what we specifically do here at Austin Lane. So I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Appreciate it. This is fun.
So there you have it. UI UX is really a feedback loop at Austin Lane. It takes the base design and utilizes the feedback to make adjustments and improvements. Now, I know I have a tendency to sidetrack the conversation with big data and big data talk, AI talk, but my tangents in there somewhere, there were a few interesting takeaways. Now, there's always input from the user, and it's a vital success to the user experience. So your voices, at least at Austin Lane, are always heard. Uh, Hours upon hours of consideration about the features to the product, they're always given, and you get to decide. They help in deciding what should be done, not if it can be done, but should it be done. And then when it comes to product, there are thousands of users all over which have different levels of understanding. So all are taken into consideration when we start talking about working with that UI UX design, and don't want to move a bunch of stuff around. We don't want brand new screens. It confuses everybody, right? We've got all the users to consider. So this is part of the reason why these product designs and redesigns, they take time for these very reasons. Now, I want to thank Lee again for his time. And if you want to know more about Austin Lane and Ale Mobile, of course, you can reach out to us. So now I want you to remember, we're getting really, really close to the new year here, and we've got one more episode in 2024 to deliver to you. And the next episode, we're going to start talking about data security. Now, I don't know about you, but I get about 50 to 100 of these phishing emails from random bots, and I don't even know if they're real people, but every day we get a bunch of stuff. Now, construction companies are tied to everything. Infrastructure projects, energy projects, defense projects. So this creates some real challenges when you start talking about integration of multiple systems. I talk a lot about big data. Well, how's big data connecting to these systems inside? How are we keeping that data safe? So we're going to start to touch on a few of these issues in that next session. So I hope you enjoyed this section on UI UX, and of course some of my ramblings. And again, I'm always open to new conversations. So please reach out if you've got a guest or a recommendation for a guest or a topic. Happy to talk about it with you and fill up that thing. But until then, I want you to celebrate the gift of today because that's why they call it the present. We'll see y'all soon.